Hey y'all, welcome back to another ballistics gel test. Today I've got Winchester Deer Season XP, their 64 grain 223 Remington load. And here's the box for that Winchester Deer Season XP 223 load. And there it is, it says deer, it's got some cool deer artwork. This is definitely meant for deer. We'll see how it performs in gel at least. Let's flip it around, take a look at the back. Here, I'll go ahead and put it right there where you can pause and read all that if you would want to, just the Deer Season XP promo information. Coming on down, here's some information on the bullet itself. And then coming down further, we've got our ballistics table. But let's go ahead and open this up and take a look at the ammo. Per standard, Winchester comes in a styrofoam container. Let's yank one out and take a look, and there it is. There's that big old giant plastic ballistic tip on there. Really curious to see how this stuff does. Let's go shoot it. And the test rifle today is my CZ527 carbine. It's got an 18 or 18.5 inch barrel, I don't exactly recall. Chambered in 223, of course. Up top, I've got a Vortex Crossfire 2 3-9x40 scope. And coming on back, I've got one of my leather cartridge pouch cuffs, which incidentally perfectly holds a CZ527 magazine, coincidentally enough, so it works for that as well. Check out my website, masonleather.com. I would absolutely love to make you one. And coming around to the other side, I've got to show you, I've got my wild bore design.
We'll be taking 3 shots from 100 yards, firing into 10% ballistics gel that has been calibrated to meet the FBI's ballistics testing protocol. And while ballistics gel isn't an exact proxy for big game, it does provide a repeatable medium through which to test various bullets and ammo against each other. After the shots, we'll examine bullet expansion, weight retention, penetration, and velocity. My goal is to provide hunters like you and I with the most objective information possible to help us make the best choice for our particular hunting situation. The ballistics gel in this video has been sourced from Clear Ballistics. You can find a link in the description.
So let's go ahead and shoot it. And we are down at the blocks after shooting that Winchester 64 grain Deer Season XP. We managed to capture 3 bullets. I wound up firing a few extra shots so that I had more to show you. The first time I came down, I'd only captured 1 bullet. The other 2 had flew out of the block, so I went ahead and fired a few more. But we do have 3 to look at. And a little bit surprisingly, they did not completely explode. I was really expecting these things to just sort of blow up. After all, they have a huge ballistic tip up front. But somehow Winchester pulled it off. They didn't do that. And as far as penetration goes, the second one is hard to see. It's way down the bottom of the block right there. But we got about 11.5, 12 inches, and then 13 inches of penetration. And then coming on over to the front of the block, we did have some pretty nasty looking wound cavities. Looks like it starts expanding very rapidly at or even just before the 1 inch mark. Then it starts to taper off at about the 5 inch mark and then peters out at about the 7.5 inch mark. And that's about what I've seen from most 223 ammo. But one thing I will note is that these wound cavities do look to be a little bit more explosive than some other ammo I've tested. Let's go ahead and take a look at the velocities for that Winchester Deer Season XP 64 grain load. Our high was 2886, our low was 2824, and our average was 2865. And here we are looking at those Winchester Deer Season XP 64 grain bullets as recovered from the gel. Let's talk about weight retention. We saw 47 grains, and 50 grains respectively for an average of 48 grains retained weight. That works out to 75% weight retention, and honestly, I'm surprised it's that high. This is basically a ballistic tip bullet. I think for what this is, it did pretty darn good. And then on to expansion, and in case you can't tell by looking at them, these things expanded like crazy, and they also held together pretty well, and it's fairly uniform around the circumference of the bullet. We saw 0.54, 0.55, and 0.59 inches for an average of 0.56 inches expanded diameter. That works out to 2.5x expansion. That is some pretty darn good expansion. Now on to velocity. Our high was 2886, our low was 2824, and our average was 2865 versus the factory build velocity of 3,020 feet per second. So we did come in 155 feet per second slow versus the factory build velocity out of the 18-inch barrel of my CZ carbine, but I think it's appropriate. Most people shooting 223 these days, especially if they're going to be hunting deer with it, are using a 16 or 18-inch barrel Yeah, there's 24-inch barreled varmint guns out there, but by and large, guys are using 16 and 18-inch barrels for 223 these days, so I think this is some good real-world information. And then on to penetration, we saw 11.5, 12, and 13 inches respectively for an average of 12 inches of penetration. That is a bit less than a lot of the deer-oriented 223 loads I have tested. This is a bit shallower than most of them, but I think that's due to the massive expansion, so with everything there's going to be a trade-off. And then on to kinetic energy, with a 64 grain bullet going on average 2,865 feet per second, we're looking at 1,166 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, and that is right there in line with most of the deer-oriented 223 loads I've tested. They tend to average about 1,200 foot-pounds, and this is right next to that. All right, y'all, time for my final thoughts on that Winchester Deer Season XP 64 grain load out of the 223. These things did actually better than I thought they were going to do. I thought they were going to break up more than they did. And before I get into, the final thoughts on this particular load, this 223 Deer Season XP load, I've seen some pretty varying results with Deer Season XP across calibers, and it's always fun looking in my comments, having people say, why do you say this? Why'd you call it a fail when it broke up and it's supposed to? It's a ballistic tip. Well, no, it's not. It's not supposed to. If you look at the ad copy on the website, if you read the box, nowhere does it say that it's fragmentary and supposed to explode, right? That's what the 3030 version did, and I called it out, and some people had issues with it in the comments. Well, then why didn't this one explode? It's a ballistic tip, it's a 223, it's going a whole lot faster, and yet the bullets held together better. I think what this load did is what the Deer Season XP bullet is supposed to do, which is not blow up into a million pieces, but provide rapid expansion, some energy dump, and still hold together for the most part, and that's what this load did. That's not what the 3030 load did. Go watch that video and read the comments and look at all the fools trying to argue down there. Anyways, I digress. So weight retention wise, 75%. That's pretty good for what this is. Again, it's a ballistic tip bullet. It's going to open up rapidly, and it did, but it still held together for the most part. Expansion, 2.5x expansion, really, really good, really good. And I think that's what these bullets are meant to do. This is what I wish every Deer Season XP bullet would do across calibers. Sometimes it's not. We had most of the weight retained, and we had really rapid expansion. I think this is perfect for what it's meant to do. If you read the box, if you read the ad copy, this is what it's supposed to do. Velocity-wise, we were 155 feet per second slower than the factory build velocity. No surprise there. That's really par for the course with a lot of 223 loads out of an 18-inch barrel, which I think is appropriate. Most people are using 16 and 18-inch barrels in their 223s. This is a deer hunting load. Most people deer hunting with a 223, as few as there are, probably aren't using 24-inch barreled varmint guns. Now, sure, some are, and you might get extra velocity if you do, but I think this is a good data point, using an 18-inch barrel and seeing what the velocity actually comes in at for most people. And then penetration-wise, it was a little on the light side compared to a lot of deer-oriented 223 loads that I have tested, which isn't super surprising considering how much these bullets expanded. We saw 12 inches on average. It was fairly consistent, 11.5, 12, and 13 inches. So at least you kind of know what they're going to do. For me, I wish it would penetrate a bit more. If I'm going to be deer hunting with something, this is just me, I want it to penetrate a little bit more. I definitely prefer an exit hole because things don't always go according to plan, and sometimes it's nice to have a blood trail for when the deer doesn't go down right there on the spot. And then kinetic energy wise, with a 64 grain bullet going on average 2,865 feet per second, we're looking at 1,166 foot-pounds of muzzle energy at the muzzle. I know I said muzzle energy, duh, it's at the muzzle, which is right in line with a lot of 223 loads I've tested. They're kind of in the 1,100 to 1,200 foot-pound range. For whatever that's worth, it's just another metric to put in your pocket and hold on to. So all in all, what would I use this ammo for? Well, personally, for me, this is just my opinion. I want a little bit more penetration. If I'm going to be using a 223 to hunt deer with, which it's not going to be my first choice. I know some people do it. I know people do it successfully. I've actually done it. I've killed deer with a 223. If it were me, I want to see a bit more penetration. But for what this ammo is, I think this did exactly what it's supposed to do. which is expand extremely rapidly, hold together for the most part so you can get some penetration, and dump most of its energy up front. I think that's exactly what this stuff did. So for what it is, it performed extremely well. Personally, for me, it's not going to be my top pick for a deer hunting load out of the 223, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't do the job for you. If you've used this ammo, let us know how it did in the comment. Hey, if you enjoy these videos, check out my website masonleather.com and get yourself some leather gear handmade by me just for you. I've been handcrafting leather gear for hunters for over a decade, and I would love to make you something. The link is in the video description. And check out my channel for more hunting ammo ballistics gel tests. I have some big news. Lots of you have emailed me or commented how much value you get out of my videos. And you've asked me, how can you be a part of this and help support the channel? Well, I got to work and now I have a way. I've created a Patreon account where you can join me in helping our fellow hunters. Click the link in this video's description and watch my Patreon welcome video, where I describe to you how your help will impact this channel and our community of hunters as a whole. And when you join me on Patreon, you'll get a lot more than I can give you here on YouTube. You'll have to go watch that welcome video linked in the description to find out the details. I'll see you there.